As you have already known that we are today discussing about something what we know as cancer. Now, before I introduce the topic, I will say something about cancer. Cancer, we all know, it's an illness which is chronic, long-term. It is becoming common and commoner. Many times it's fatal. Yet, Professor G.K. Rath, many of you must have known him or heard about him. He was Professor of Oncology and Center Chief at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Institute Rotary Cancer Hospital. What he said, that if he was to choose between cancer and cardiovascular illness, and cardiovascular illness is something which has the highest mortality, he would choose cancer. Because cancer was something when you could be declared that you are cancer free. People who have cardiac illnesses, somehow it continues with them. So that is the kind of image cancer has. And many of you must have read the book, The Emperor of Maladies by Siddharth Mukherjee. And it talks about the complex nature of this illness. So cancer, what is so unique about cancer? Cancer is multifactorial, we all know it, and we know very little about its etiology, how it is going to behave, and what kind of treatment is going to be the Rambam for this particular illness. But what is not yet understood or taken care of is that the cancer carries stigma, like we are mental health specialists, Dr. Murthy and myself, that cancer also has a stigma with it. And what stigma does it, that it does not let the person come in front of the world, does not take the treatment, and family tries to shield him away from people and society. So a very major support system he is deprived of, and many times the treatment is not provided just because of stigma, because many people, they shun people suffering from cancer. So that we will learn from these two people when Rajiv would be conversing with Dr. Murthy. Dr. Murthy, he would tell it himself, but Dr. Murthy, though he is a professor of psychiatry, he is a cancer survivor too, last 10 years. I won't go into those details. A little bit about Professor Murthy. Professor Murthy has contributed immensely to wherever he had been, to all the institutions he has worked with, namely Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research at Chandigarh, NIMHANS, that is National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, Bangalore, and then he has helped the Madras High Court, Supreme Court of India, National Human Rights Commission, World Health Organization, and where in 2001 he was the chief editor of World Mental Health Report. Rajiv Mehrotra is another person whom I say friend, philosopher and guide. And whenever I am in a low spirit, I talk to him. And his laughter, you will see, it lifts up all my blue moods and gives me a kind of energy I am looking for. His laughter is unparalleled, unmatched. But little bit about Rajiv Mehrotra. People who are familiar with the India International Center, with the India Habitat Center, those who have watched YouTube or television, they would realize that Rajiv Mehrotra is a writer, author, producer, filmmaker, and he has been supporting young people in making documentaries through his organization, PSBT, that is Public Broadcasting Service Trust. He has authored many books, and his exemplary interviews are available on YouTube, and I urge you that you kindly see some of his interviews, which are available on YouTube in conversation with Rajiv Mehrotra. Above all, he is a very close person with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In fact, he helped His Holiness in establishing this foundation when His Holiness got his Nobel Prize. And with that money, this foundation was established, and he continues to help this foundation as its Secretary General.
Thank you, Dr. Khandelwal. On behalf of the foundation, I'd like to express our deep gratitude to you for joining us as the chair for today's conversation. To briefly introduce Dr. Sudhir Khandelwal, he is a former professor and head of psychiatry, head of Department of Psychiatry at the All India Institute for Medical Sciences, or AIIMS Delhi, where he served for over 32 years. He also served as the chief of the National Drug Dependence Treatment Center at AIIMS. After his superannuation, he joined the Holy Family Hospital in Delhi. He has published more than 140 papers as a field expert and worked in different cultures of the world, including rural Nepal, Ethiopia, and the UK as faculty member and consultant psychiatrist. Dr. Khandelwal's global impact also includes chairing and serving on the governing boards of several reputed organizations, such as the Global Network for Mental and Neurological Health Research, the International Consortium for Mental Health Policy and Services, and the National Board of Richmond Fellowship Society for Psychosocial Rehabilitation.
I just want to pay a great sort of a tribute, which I think deeply connects with the principles of what we are hoping to discuss and in some ways offer insight, perspectives, and hopefully wisdom. And that's because I know Dr. Khandelwal well for many decades, and he too has played a pivotal role in my life, and I know of Dr. Murthy. And I think the underlying principle is, the word we use in Hindi, कि किसी की नियत क्या है. And why is that important? And that's really important whether you are the doctor who's treating a cancer patient, or you're a visitor to a cancer patient and you don't know what to say, or you're with the family of a cancer patient, or the cancer patient, him or herself. And I have watched, Dr. Khandelwal, when he was at the Medical Institute, and I remember taking somebody who was working with me and was in a crisis to see him. And so here he was, surrounded by hundreds of patients, deeply agonized at their distress, and that he could only spare 5 minutes or 3 minutes for each patient. I mean, that is the imperative of our public health system in India. But the quality of that engagement was truly inspiring and touching. And also a personal narrative. This is not to point to any particular institution or hospital. And so when he came out of, finished with his long and illustrious tenure in government hospitals in the service of the common man, he was deeply agonized and anguished as to what to do and how to productively spend the rest of his life. And so, as has happened with most, you attach yourself to a hospital. And he attached himself to I will not name them, but three guesses and you'll hit all three, sort of major hospital, where he was deeply distressed with the manner in which psychiatry was practiced. The pressures of tests that you didn't need, of quick diagnosis, of multiple clinical interventions, so that you had a high success rate, and so he had the courage to give up all that represented and all that it offered, to be able to start his own practice and to go to one of the few still caring hospitals, a missionary hospital, the Holy Family Hospital, where he is deeply loved and sought after. And it's a similar tale with Dr. Murthy. So I just want to start with this idea of the intention, because when we are looking at as Dr. Khandelwal just said, that there is this whole fear of the big C. So sometimes we don't even want to use the word cancer. And of course, things have changed dramatically, not just in the treatments, but also in our understanding of cancer, that cancer may have certain patterns of multiplying cells that you don't quite know what to do and are destroying themselves, is that cancer is no longer implicitly terminal. Not merely because of how successful a fight you might lead, and it's worth debating whether cancer should be fought or embraced, or how we should relate to the big C. But also now that we know that some forms of cancer are inherently curable, or some will outlive the patients, forms of prostate cancer, for example, and you don't really have to do a lot about it. So, just a sense in your own practice, because you're two very humane people. And so I think the relationship to the disease is so very important, and the motivation with which people come to it. And again, the thing that you were talking about, that our fear of disclosing that we have cancer is as much our fear of how people will respond. Sometimes we don't want pity. Sometimes we don't want our anguish and distress at having cancer to be reinforced and kya ho gaya, to mar raha hai, kind of thing. So just give us a sense of and that's what we're really interested in, I think, here, is the state of mind at play, for the patient, depending on his prognosis, and on the caregiver, and for those who interact with the caregivers and the patients.
Thank you, Rajiv. Firstly, I want to thank Freedom Foundation, Freedom for Universal Responsibility, for this opportunity, and Sudhir for introducing me, and Rajiv for the interview, and all of you coming here. I know there are a number of persons like Sudesh who have been remarkable in fighting cancer and talked about it. The most important thing is, this morning, as I was saying, I was trying to get into the mind of Rajiv. So I was seeing a fantastic program.
Did you find anything there?
Dukkha, about suffering. This came out about a year back in the Red Door. It's a fantastic video if you want to see it. Then you made a very interesting point. Purpose is not fighting but healing. I want to take that to the current one. What it means and this one. Just to give you the depth of the understanding of cancer, Siddharth Mukherjee, in his book of 2011, says what cancer means as follows. The word "you have cancer," these simple words come as a terrible shock. Life, as you know, changes in the instant, nothing in the life same again. Panic and fear overwhelm you as you desperately pin your hopes on doctors and the medical treatment. That's what Mukherjee said in 2012. What happened to me is describable by my wife was waiting outside when I was having my colonoscopy. And because I was a doctor, the doctor kept describing what was the finding, as though he's describing a sort of a picture. And when I came out, I told my wife that life, as we know, is finished. But interestingly, I said, we can make a new life. That sort of symbolizes, because what happens is that before I go further, I want to say that I have been working with disasters for 40 years. If you talk to anyone who has been in a disaster, Bhopal or Orissa cyclone or Gujarat earthquake or anything, they'll say, my life is before the earthquake, after the earthquake. The same thing happens to us cancer patients. What happens is, everything that we thought was stable becomes unstable. Or as someone puts it, life living in hope, coping with uncertainty. This is Jimmy Holland's, who has been 25 years working with cancer from Sloan Kettering, says that. So what happens is that the bubble of immortality bursts. Now there is no one way, as you say again, in the suffering is different for different people, depending on the meaning they give, the background they have. So what confronts us is to rediscover ourselves, both an opportunity and a threat. Now how we take it, whether we take it as an opportunity or a threat that everything has come to an end, is the real issue of living with cancer, the topic that we are discussing. I'll stop at that and take it up further.
I do want to take that a little further, because the point I was making was that what you're suggesting was the discourse when you had cancer. I think the discourse is changing, largely because it is quite common very early in the diagnosis to be able to predict, like I said, that this is entirely curable, or this does not even need intervention, and this has a very high level. So the niyat of the doctor who is making the presentation, so one is a very impersonal, look, that's the way it is, this is the probability, and that's it. Now it's your, you process it. I think that is one aspect. And then when you were talking about my sort of thoughts on dukkha and suffering, and I have to immediately sort of predicate this by its, what I'm going to say is much easier said than practiced, and I certainly have failed to practice it, but I shall still hold up the torch. And that really depends on how well you have prepared in your life. And so if you've met the Dalai Lama, and this essential teaching of meditations and reflections and impermanence. So I think the lesson that I take away from the teachings of His Holiness and the Buddhism is that we don't know how life will turn out. And one of the alleyways is cancer. But there are many such alleyways which threaten our very existence. And
the difficulty, sorry I'm interrupting you, the difficulty is, in spite of all the advances in medicine, you don't know whether you're going to live for 2 years or 10 years or 20 years. I'm not dramatizing it. I have lost 3 of my dear friends who are 10 years younger to me, who are all psychiatrists. And I feel very sick, very, very acutely aware. And that is the nature of every cancer patient. However it is, keeps hearing about it, knowing about it, and needs guidance how to organize the limited life in front of them.
Well, I would just suggest, that, I don't see it that way.
Okay, go ahead.
Largely because I think that if you go through the preparation for change, and the preparation that it need not be cancer, we could all be dead in the next 5 minutes. And cancer is only one possibility, that if we are able to shape our lives, not waiting for cancer to happen, or to be in an ICU with a cardiac arrest, as to what could happen, regardless of the particularities of a particular condition, then we would all be the better off. Not easily done. But I just wanted to make the case for that.
No, I think your case is very strong. Unfortunately, we don't work that way.
Exactly. So, Mike, the next question would be that you have mentioned the uncertainty of prognosis, is that when we confront the particular crisis of cancer, rather than the particular crisis of a terminal, of immortality. So what is unique about the predicaments and the challenges that a diagnosis of cancer offers? So you've shared with us that it is the uncertain prognosis.
The first thing is that it is not only psychological, it is biological. Suddenly from a whole person, you become a physical body. Because you are getting your blood test done, you get your PET scans done, you get your medicines, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, surgery, whole lot of things. You suddenly become aware of only your body and everything else disappears. That's the biggest challenge. The second challenge is the true nature of cancer, where there is no guarantee that what will happen. Third is that the treatment procedures, even today, I don't want to frighten you and I don't want to say, is one of the worst. As a doctor in 50 years, I never experienced that type of a suffering that I went through and colon cancer particularly is a very bad chemotherapy. You are there for 12 hours. You go at 8 o'clock and you go home at 8 o'clock, one after the other medicines are given, and all that you have is looking at the ceiling. And then after 3 days, you become completely useless. You can't eat, you can't walk, all those things. Then, when the treatment finishes, a bigger challenge occurs, Rajiv. In the sense, suddenly all the attention you are getting from the doctors, nurses, family disappears and you have to negotiate it. My doctor told me, oh, Dr. Murthy, you finished the treatment, now you go and enjoy. As though it's a celebration. Like
Let's just hold on to this process, because it's a very familiar one, you know, for me, for people we know. If it's not ourselves, it's people we love. Is that, so as someone who's been through it, what was the dominant, and doesn't have to be single, what were the dominant emotions, you know, that came up? I mean, ultimately we experience what we experience through our emotional, how do I put it, perceptions. So, I mean, even physical pain, two people will respond differently to pain. So what was the emotion that comes up and in general? And how does one individually and in terms of people who support you at that time, how can they help? To me, I mean, in a sense, it comes up is fear. And it's not just the fear of mortality, but it is also the fear of one's ability, if you are the cancer patient, and if you are the caregiver, the fear of how this will be managed and handled and what will happen. Now, assuming that is correct, or is an apt generalization.
No, you're absolutely right. I'll give you an analogy. I have been working with Bhopal disaster for the last 40 years, and about 10 years back, when we went back, one man was building a new house, and so I walked in and talked to him and said, "Ghar bana rahe, sab kuch acha hai." "Nahi, doctor sahab, wo jaag hai na, wo MI se hai na, andar baith gaya hai, pata nahi kab khatam karega." He said it so emotionally, I remember it even today. So what happens is that one is, first question that comes is, why me? I was doing so well and I was keeping good life. I'm a vegetarian and I was sort of a spiritual person, whatever you want to call it. Second question is, what will happen? Because no one, if you ask the doctor, will I become all right? I can't say, because they don't know. Third question is about worry about the family. Most often in India, what I have seen is that what will happen to my spouse, what will happen to my child. I'll give you two examples. You know, about 40 years back, I've written it about in this one, seeing a doctor with leukemia. In those days, there was just blood transfusion. She developed a very severe pain for which there was no physical pain. So they called us, and in PGH Chandigarh. Then I went in to see, and then suddenly realized her problem was she was worried about her 10-year-old child. What will happen to him? Who will bring him up? And why is this happening to me? Okay. Similarly, there was a lady in ICU in Shankara Hospital where I was volunteering. She said, "I'm very worried about it." You know, I said, "Why?" Because she got married late, and the husband is not very sensitive to that. And she had a 14-year-old girl, and said, "Who is going to look after me?" So each one is a different type of a scenario. It could be the spouse, it could be the child, it could be the work, or it could be a spiritual crisis. You know.
But what about the fear of suffering?
Fear of suffering, by and large, is not as bad. The physical suffering, at least till you reach the end stage when it becomes the most important thing. But in the early stages, the fear of the treatment is the most important thing. Fear of not coming out is the most important thing. You know, and then what will happen to my family is the other most important thing. But as the illness progresses, nerves get affected, then pain becomes a big issue, and then the quality of life suffers, Rajiv.
So in terms of the, I mean, ultimately what matters is the how the mind, how the mind processes this, and we know that different sensibilities will process it differently. So let's just say, as the patient, that what do you say to the patient? What can the patient now start doing? If we put aside the argument or the logic that we should be preparing for this at different levels of success, because it's going to happen, whether it's cancer or something else. So what would you urge a patient? Because you may not even know. I mean, they may articulate their concern about the child, but it could really be something else. So how do we begin to sensitize people who are struggling with these issues? Surely we can't just sit across the table and say, okay, don't worry, this is the solution for your son's future, this is the solution for how it's going to be financed, and so now you will feel blissed out. My sense is,
Yeah.
and I mean, obviously you have a far larger data bank, that I think that what drives us as human beings is really, whichever form it may take,
Yeah.
is dukkha, and the
Absolutely.
fear of suffering,
Absolutely.
whether it is our own suffering or the suffering of those that we care about. So what can we do at this
Yeah.
pregnant stage
Let me
to
answer your question in a reverse manner of two people who handled this suffering beautifully. One was a lady who had severe pain, and I said, "You look very peaceful at that." She said, "I think of Ramana Maharshi. When he was asked when he had cancer, he said, 'My body has pain, I don't have pain.' I use the same method." Similarly, another lady in terminal cancer said, "I read Sundar Kanda every day." These are real examples, and that gives me hope, and I live within hope. That is the positive side of it. The most important thing that the medical system and the community doesn't allow is for the person to acknowledge it as an event. Two things happen. Doctors say, "Don't worry, we have got everything." Or the family becomes collusion. It's with the word collusion. Don't even tell the patient. To my mind, it's totally wrong, because every one of us has a right to know what is happening to our body and how long we are living it. But coming to the positive side, I think the most important thing is to, as you have said it in the suffering talk also, recognize it as an event in life. Not a bad event or a good event, but it's an event which requires you to reprioritize, reorganize the supports from the people, and find a new purpose of life. For example, till about 10 years back, I mean, if I tell you the week that I was diagnosed, I was coming to Chandigarh on Friday to book release of Arun Shauri's book in Chandigarh with Manju Jedka, and going back then evening, next day going to Bhopal. And by that time all may happen, and I was in the operation theatre. So most of us similarly, I'll tell you, the problem is, for example, one girl was brought to me with aggression. I said, "What is happening?" She said, "Look, I have lost my hair because of chemotherapy. My sister is getting married. I want her to get married so that I can be part of it. And they are getting married so I can't be part of it." So every one of them has a life situation which is different. Now, the most important thing is to listen to the person, and for the person to reorganize the life around it. For example, I stopped clinical work totally after my cancer. I said, I will not do for the people, but by the people and of the people. Then I would say, I will find how are people understanding cancer in the Indian setting. Indian setting, understanding cancer is totally different than the West.
In what ways?
Most of it is understood in the spiritual sense. I will tell you about it a little later. Second thing is by the people. We will have to tell them that, look, these are the things you can do. But personally, I mean, many of you have got this little card which we made it from our experience. That is, we say, these are the 5 things you can do to be strong. These are the 5 things to do when you have a mental distress. And this skill of 5 plus 5 to everyone not only will decrease the suffering, increase their adherence, decrease their side effects, and increase their longevity with cancer. All evidence proven. So this doesn't get occur because there is, as you said about Sudhir, the pharma industry, the investigative industry, and other forces don't allow you to touch upon the core of what needs to be done. The personhood of the person has to be rediscovered after cancer. I will say it is rarely, I have talked to a person living with a diagnosis of cancer who says, my life is the same. I'll stop at that.
I think it's important to read these 10 principles out briefly, because it's one of my sort of quests personally and in a community sense is that when one is going through a crisis of the mind triggered by whatever parameter, of course there is the pharmacological intervention which has its own challenges, and I think we have 2 wonderful doctors here who are themselves skeptical about its absolute value and potential, and will see them as an occasional means for a limited end, that unless it is circumscribed by something that's very difficult and challenging, though easily encouraged, and that is behavior change. And it's a story that I often recount as a sort of a preamble to what I'm going to talk about. And there's a lot of work being done internationally, and I would argue for financial and business compulsions, that is looking at the value, and of course there is value, to the different spiritual practices and traditions, whether it's meditation or it's and different kinds of meditation. We're talking about the neuroplasticity of the brain and a whole range of approaches to this. And so it's called a Mind Science Conference, and there were these presentations in Dharamsala about the research that had been done, where there was 3 weeks of a program at an educational institution or whatever project of its kind. And so for 3 days patiently the Dalai Lama heard this. And here's someone who sort of spent a lifetime in training the mind. And at the end of it, all this enthusiasm, he said, I was initiated and I started practice when I was 8 years old, and I'm now whatever. I mean, he's going to be 88, but this may have been 3-4 years ago. But behavior change, very difficult. So it becomes very easy for us when someone is in distress to tell them how to think or to tell them what to think. And so this whole aspect of agency.
Can I just interrupt for a minute? See, one of the mistakes that many people make is we must present a black and white picture of cancer. It is not that.
Exactly.
It is a spectrum. I'll give you an example. When I went to the cancer hospital, Shankara Cancer Hospital, to give voluntary service, there was a psychiatrist and a social worker, both experienced people in cancer. Why are you coming? No one comes to us. I said, you don't understand what it means to be. Why should you come to a psychiatrist taking an appointment? So what I did was, I went to the chemotherapy section because I had gone through that just there. I didn't ask them, what is your problem? I asked them, how has cancer changed your life? Oh, Dr. Saab, we don't know how it is. I used to be doing this, I used to be, now may they keep me in a separate room. I mean, a whole lot of things. Second, I used to say, how are you coping with it? I didn't ask their problems at all. They come out with all sorts of saying, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm reading this, or I'm, organizing it. Then I used to ask them, how can I help you? They said, hardly anyone asks these questions. That is the problem is, and the other thing that happens is, friends and relatives tend to cut off their contact. The most important thing I would like to leave a message, keep contact with the person with cancer. Listen to the person, give practical help, don't give unnecessary advice. Ye kar do, wo kar do, ye kar do. And more important than that, recognize the person, continuing to be a person rather than just a patient. Very often उनको छोड़ दो यार, मूर्ति ये तो आएगा नहीं है, बुलाए तो मीटिंग पे नहीं आएगा, उनका कैंसर है. As though your cancer and your help is finished. The point which you make in this, the body and mind are not separate. And lastly, I would say for the family, caregiver, particularly take care of yourself. Caregiving is a very demanding one. My wife is there, sitting there, and it is very, very demanding. You have to do a lot more work. You have to deal with your own things. I was, for example, in the nearly 1 year, a phone call came, I would start crying from Dr. Veg or Dr. Sudhir or someone, and I couldn't control it. I mean, actually, if I talk a little more, I will probably start breaking down even after now. So all of this requires a reorganization. And every one of us can help by being sensitive and continuing to treat the person as a person. That's the most important message I want to give it to all of you. Please don't exclude the person, don't treat him as an ill person, and reach out to him and give him practical help. For example, one lady said, I said, how do you cope? I said, I have a very good friend who comes with me for radiotherapy every time. We go together, she waits outside, and I come out and come home. That is a fantastic help, sir. Because when you go alone, you see all other patients, and you say, what's going to happen? You hear, oh, that patient is no more, all sorts of things. But if you have someone standing, fantastic. And the last thing I want to say is that the community, we have to develop supports, self-help groups, actual support. Like for example, in Delhi, number of agencies are there. Harmala has started this home care program, world-class home care program. She used her personal experience to set up a home care program of a world-class, totally free. Similarly, now new Tanisha Foundation has come, they are giving nutrition support. So think of it as an opportunity to help, rather than think of it, "Arey yaar, chhod do inko." I forgot about it. Thank you.
I do want to emphasize, agreeing with everything you've said and more, is really that the need for the caregiver to nurture a very high degree of sensitivity. What I didn't hear you say is the imperative to ask a person how he feels, because it is the sensation and the experience of feeling that defines our experience. So if we limit it to an engagement of the mind, it will not penetrate the suffering of the individual or the quality of empathy and connect of the caregiver. So the capacity to help, and this is where the niyat comes in, is this driven out of a motivation to feel good? I'm going and helping somebody, to score brownie points on the checklist of what will get me into heaven? Or is it driven by that quality of personal feeling that connects with an effort to understand how the other person is feeling? And sometimes it can terribly backfire. And I'll give you an example. Of one of these caregiving NGOs, we have a live-in maid who's struggling with breast cancer. And so sometimes, we struggle and we don't have the vocabulary to be able to engage with what she is going through. And so a well-meaning but not sensitive or adequately trained caregiver comes in. And so this girl has, in the last 12 months, lost her mother, lost her aunt, and lost her brother to cancer. And there is the funeral of the father coming up. And we're all trying gently to nudge her into going. And so this lady says to her, "Look, you must go now, because 5 months later you may not be able to go." Absolute disaster. And I also disagree with you, sir, with great respect, that I think this is a very Western model of the right to know and the right to determine your future and what your course of action is. I think that the far greater aspiration is the aspiration to take responsibility and to be able to respond. I'll give you a case of my mother. My mother had cancer and was struggling with cancer. And we had quite an amazing team of doctors. So the doctor went in, a surgeon, and the famous Dr. Mahajan. Yeah. And there was, I don't mind taking their names because for me they're as iconic as you are, Dr. Sridharan, who was the medical director at the Holy Family Hospital at that time, and a missionary hospital. So when they first went in for the surgery, and they suspected that there would be a tumor, which there was, and they cleaned it out. And this was my first experience with cancer. And they came out of the surgery, and they told me, "Look, we found something, and it's going for biopsy, but we think it's cancer." I sort of fainted because I was really shook up by this. So the next day, it was like, what do we do? Do we do chemo? Do we do radiation? What do we do? So my favorite question to a doctor has always been, and I found it 95% successful, what would she do if she was your mother? I don't want to know what you would do to a patient. So they both said we would do nothing. And the reason we would do nothing is because we know your family, we know the implications psychologically it will have on your mother and on the family. And because if we intervene, there's no guarantee that all this will work. The surgeon says, "I'm reasonably confident I've cleared it up, and so that's what I would do. So I said, wonderful, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And so I told my sisters, but I didn't tell anybody else. So it was a huge responsibility that I carried about this. And interestingly, at that time, I went and I was doing a film on a God-man, and who materializes fantastic things, or materialized fantastic things. I went to see him, and I was distraught. My mother is dying, and he said, here's some vibhuti. Give it to her, she'll be fine. I went to see the Dalai Lama. He said, look, if your motivation is to save your mother from suffering, that's all right. But you need to meditate on death so that you can handle it and process it in a manner that is supportive of her capacity to process it. So that's what we did. And she went into remission for more than 5 years. So I am very fearful of... Let me finish because it's extremely important. Yeah. Because it has to do with niyat. It has to do... You cannot, with one stroke, just like what the caregiver who came in from an NGO, what she was saying was the right thing. But it was devastating, and it was a setback for her. Yeah. I would rather have said, look, I think it will be nice if you went. You will feel complete if you send. So it is not merely what you say, but how you say it, and the motivation with what you say, and are you truly willing? Either are you just ducking the question, or are you willing to take responsibility for what you say? So I fear, and that's what, when I was last, talking about this aspect of agency, that we are looking at data. We're looking at so-called best practices, which are in some ways statistical. And we all know that there is a standard deviation in statistics. So there is no singular protocol. We can only share experiences as to what has worked for us and urge niyat कि आप ये किस नियत से कर रहे हैं. So I would spend as much time in my motivation. Is this to shuck responsibility? Is this to have someone else take responsibility? Is it because I can't deal with it, so I should step back and let have someone else? So I just wanted to emphasize that, of course, and this is what I was about to share with talk about the Dalai Lama, that I think the issue really was that we do not have uniform agency. We may be told, I may know that this is what I should do, but I can't do it. Where do I find the motivation? And so in our tradition, we have this idea that you can have intellectual recognition, that this is the right thing to do because the mind tells you, and it probably is. But then that has to move to understanding, that we really understand it, not because someone has said it, but because of the vulnerability of the cancer patient at layers and layers and layers, that each cancer patient, as you pointed out, sir, experiences their suffering uniquely and differently, both in terms of the nature and nurture that precedes it. And so, ultimately, what can we fall back on but our human quality of empathy and of motivation? And some people, and I think that is the genius of our civilizational heritage, that we not merely communicate wisdom, but we communicate method. And what he has put forth here, and that's why I wanted to read it, and I'm going to read it now, is the method. And for me, this is far more valuable than any advice or any protocols or any statistic or data, is that what are some of these things that you can practically do? And again, there is an element of agency in all of this, because you say, sleep for 8 hours. Now, if only you'd get 8 hours of sleep, you'll be fine. But I'm not getting 8 hours of sleep. Don't tell me that. That is the human response. So unless we move away from the vocabulary of sermonizing, I understand you're not having. Now, what are some of the things that you can do so that you get a better night's sleep? Because you have the fears of cancer. Can we give you a methodology of thought? Can we sensitize you to the idea of impermanence? Look, everything is impermanence. The famous tale of the Buddha, that this woman says, my son is dying. And he says, okay, just go to any house. Now, he could have told her, look, everybody dies. But he wanted to evoke in her the realization that this is the universal principle. So our aspiration, I'm not saying it's easy, I'm not saying it's doable, I don't even know, and there's something I've shared with Sudhir a million times, that in this whole issue of mental health, that how can we practically make it a public health initiative? With all its, no, I have to finish this, with all its limitations. Yes. So what you are proposing is, in a sense, in this, and I'm going to read it before you respond, sure, because I see the most value in the articulation of these. And I would, sort of frame them and see how many of them we could do, because I haven't seen it so succinctly articulated. So A, thank you and congratulations for this. And it says, I do 30 minutes of exercise, walking daily. Now, this exercise could be just lying in bed and doing this, if that's your capacity. So the principle of movement, I think, is what comes in. I sleep for at least 8 hours daily. I would change that I aspire to sleep. Because if it becomes dictatorial, then I'm already a failure, because somehow I am not sleeping and I should be able to sleep. There's something wrong with me. We have to be very careful that that is not. I daily eat fruits and vegetables. I find it difficult to eat. I have no sense of taste. Then we have, I share my feelings with friends and family. Friends and family must be receptive. And so we urge them to do that. I write down my feelings and thoughts. I can't write. But I can share my... I'm only picking on the principles. Sure. They're all very seminal, and I would swear by them. But if taken literally, without the niyat, then they can be counterintuitive. So we have to put ourselves on the line, internalizing these in their application. I listen to music daily. This has been, I think a lot of work has been done on music therapy, and there was this research paper that you kindly gave me, and I just want to move very quickly to some of those. I use all available social supports, which must be, I should be open and receptive to help. Very often we want to shut out the world. We don't want to be helped. And I understand life from spiritual beliefs. I don't. I wonder, what is God doing up there? He must be very busy. Just look at the amount of human suffering there is. No, that's a very common response. Yeah. And we have to confront it. And we have to have a response to that. And then when you say karma, which is again a very dangerous thing in Africa, ये तो आपका कर्म है, तो वो तो बेचारा वैसे ही मर गया. मैंने क्या किया था जिससे हमारे ऊपर ये बीत रही है? I must have done some wrong, so I'm a victim. And then it's I make time, for happy time. So
let me ask you one question, Rajiv.
Sorry, no, please.
You process it, and by that time I'll give one or two examples of. The question which I want to ask you is, you end up this dukkha video. I urge you all to see this video. This is the Red Door program. It was done November 22nd, 2022. It's a brilliant one. He, Basit, and Suraj have a conversation about suffering.
There's the lady from Red Door. Stand up.
Thank you very much. Anita, I think. Thank you very much.
She's the
brilliant, and I have heard it many times.
She's the Karta Dharta.
Now, one of the things you say, I want you to answer that, and give me 1 minute before you answer. Okay? Freedom from suffering is not the goal, but freedom of suffering is the goal. If I got it right, I would like you to respond to that. Before that, I want to say, it's very difficult to have a one universal solution to cancer. Let me tell you how sensitive, how difficult it is to be a cancer doctor. For example, one of my colleagues, lady was losing her hair. He said, shave it off. The lady went into suicide because he said shaving off hair for a lady is like widowhood. And unless you do it gently, unless you do it sensitively, it can be received in a very bad manner. That's the challenge of all of us working as a caregiver as well as this one. Another lady had a guilt that why didn't the doctor tell me my husband is dying? Because he wanted to go to Shirdi, I would have taken him there. At least he would have had mental peace. I mean, I can tell you any number of stories, but I want you to answer to us this question of freedom from, not from suffering, but of suffering. That means we are, like Sarva Priyananda says, it's like two arrows. The first arrow is the pain, the second arrow is what we perceive.
We have a disagreement with Swamiji. But first I just wanted to acknowledge that I think we are seeing two great men on this table. And I don't say it facetiously. It's because where I started, and I started, no, you can't get away from it. It's because when we started, I mentioned the niyat and the motivation. Because of their motivation, they would never say what that doctor said to the patient. So if you watch Sudhir, I haven't watched him in action, but I've also looked him up, is that if you'd watch Sudhir in action, where he had this 3 minutes, I mean, I would feel so sorry for him with this patient. It was just the quality of connect. It's just like the met the Dalai Lama. He holds your hand for 5 minutes, 2 minutes, for 30 seconds, and you feel his integrity. So ultimately, that's all we can do. Nurture who we are so that we can be of value to other people. And I really appreciate, sir, you're talking about this, that we share these protocols so that we can learn from them and internalize them and then apply them. And what is dangerous if we teach them as the 10 commandments of dealing with people. And to come to this, it's a somewhat philosophical thing of the freedom from and the freedom of suffering, and it's a very Buddhist perspective. And that comes I'll just take half a step back because it's very crucial. And people know me sometimes think it's a cop-out, but it's not. And when the Buddha attained enlightenment, whatever enlightenment is, and this is not the context for a discussion on what enlightenment is, when the Buddha attained enlightenment, in a nutshell, we believe that he saw the true nature of reality. And when he saw the true nature of reality and he got up from under the Bodhi tree, he was silent. Because his experience was a non-conceptual experience. He didn't know how to communicate it. In the same way that we can never know what a cancer patient feels and the ways in which every different cancer patient feels. Because if I can't tell you what coffee tastes like till you have tasted coffee, are you going to tell me and am I going to understand verbally what a person who has cancer feels like? And you layer it with the fact that each human being is different, that there are different kinds of cancer, and from my understanding, which is a little different, is that today doctors are saying that if you have a particular form of, say, prostate cancer, we will put a little pin of needle, whatever, and if you're 85 years old, I mean, you can forget any other treatment because you probably won't need it, you'll outlive it, or whatever it is. So there is a degree which wasn't available 10 years ago to the prognosis of it. And so there is just no way we can know. So what the Buddha taught, and that's why the whole idea of the Four Noble Truths, and forgive my sort of digression into my sort of faith and philosophy, was really the truth and the fact of suffering. Now, I have no idea when I confront, I mean, I do suffer, and if I were to experience even greater suffering, I mean, I panic and I call him, he claims he calls me up, but I call him up too. And so the idea was that if we can acknowledge, if we can recognize that the inherent nature of life, and actually suffering, I don't know, I actually don't remember what I said, and I thought it was garbage, and so my sort of, the organizer of the conference told me. But it was really that what we say really is unsatisfactoriness. So we want something and we don't get it. Or things are impermanent. And so we experience unsatisfactoriness. Relationships are impermanent. If I buy a new car, which is looking glossy and new, it gets scratched, the telephone gets scratched, the cell phone gets scratched, and then I experience dissatisfaction with it, and I suffer. So similarly, if we don't realize that the end of life is not necessarily, not everybody's going to suffer. Some people just die like that. But the anticipation of that moment where I will cease to exist, emptiness, vacuity, can be frightening. And the final comment, I mean, I don't want to delve too deeply into this. So when we say freedom from suffering, we can't be free from the experience of that, but we can be free of how we experience that experience. So we cannot be free from the sensation of pain, the biochemical impulse that goes to the brain and triggers the sensation of pain. But like you were talking about this, the Ramana Maharishi, that's what Ramana Maharishi did. That's what the great minds are able to do. Separate the self, the obsession with the I, me, mine. This whole thing of I with Ramana. But that, I mean, I don't want to go down Ramana. I mean, there's a whole philosophy there. So if that is softened, then you don't experience pain. But inherent to this is what these two gentlemen embody, and that is compassion. And this is exactly what he's talking about, is that the more we think about other people, the less we suffer. And this is just, it's not just because it's virtuous, but that it's practical. Because if I'm busy experiencing other people and their pain, then I don't have time for my pain. And you know, Harmala is a great example. We were in college together, and she's a very dear friend of mine. I mean, her trigger was an episode of cancer. Now, she could have turned that experience as being resentful that it happened, it changed her life for the rest of, whatever. But she came back and said, now what can I do to help other people who have it? And by the way, this is a fairly common response in many ailments. As somebody's child is spastic, then they say, okay, now I'm going to set up a spastic society to support the children of other people who are spastic. So there's the cornerstone of who the Dalai Lama is, and forgive me for talking about him, is that he's considered the embodiment of compassion. And that is why we use compassion, not love. Because love in common vocabulary is connected to attachment. That means reciprocity. So can I invest compassionately? And I mean, like I said, I've seen it in action with him. That quality of engagement with the limitations of time. So it's as much the amount of time as the quality of time. So I think really, it really still remains for me, all about motivation, about compassion that we can offer to the caregiver. And we have two very powerful but difficult practices for a person in this situation. Very difficult. I couldn't do it easily. I couldn't do it. And that is, it's called, and I just share it as a principle that we can nurture. And it's called exchanging oneself with others. And so what you do, the traditional, modern, contemporary, I call it flaky practice, and sometimes I get into arguments with people on that, is that we are taught that if you're suffering, you visualize golden light, coming into you, and it washes out all your pain and your suffering, and you're free from it, and you have embraced the divine. But the divine is meant to be compassionate. So it's not about getting rid of my suffering, because it's actually enforcing the I. So what we do in the Buddhist tradition of His Holiness is that we visualize the pain and the suffering of somebody else, so someone we know. So that is our healing practice. So we visualize that suffering, and we process that suffering coming into us as black smoke. Coming into us and in the heart, piercing the heart, breaking up the I, and flowing back to the person as golden light. And we believe that that is the most powerful. If you really want to... so what that does is, it purifies you and your relationship with the person who is suffering, yet you're willing to take on their suffering. Not just say, what can I do for you? And actually thinking, how many people have observed that I am doing this? And on the checklist to heaven, will it be a tick mark? So I just wanted to juxtapose your very valuable, and I don't want to understand, I don't want to undermine it at all, Because unless we listen to the different strategies and processes that are the bringing together of what people have tried, internalize them, and then with that kind of commitment to the others, look at what is appropriate, needed, and wanted. That's all.
Could I just summarize a few thoughts of mine in this one? There will be many people who are living with cancer. There are others, caregivers. And as Rosalind Carter said about mental health, we are all caregivers at one point or the other, or we will become caregivers or will receive caregiving. Like that, cancer is going to touch all of us. The most important thing I would like to leave the message is, it is an event like no other. Take it from me, I have worked with various types of situations. As Rajiv has put it rightly, the question is, don't ask them, what is wrong with you, you'll be all right. Ask them, how has your life changed? Just this question. No one asks this question. Next is that listen to the person. Don't react, say that, no, don't worry, everything will be all right. Just listen to the person, give time, and do it in one-to-one. One of the biggest things that we do wrong in India is that, sab log baithe hai. You are about, no. You say, no. For example, I had a dear friend who was dying, and we went to see. And I said, I want to have 2 minutes with you. We went inside, we said something to each other, and I felt very well, and the other person also felt well. So do it in a one-to-one situation, and don't break the contact. Please, I've seen it so often it has happened. It happened to me. Someone who knew me for 30 years suddenly stopped completely. Not too many, but it's one. And most important thing is, give practical support. Don't say, what can I do for you? Can I come with you to get the blood test done? Can I make a meal and bring it to you? Can I go with you when you go in the car or the things? That would be a very big thing. And lastly, I want to say it again, Rajiv, the point that we are discussing is, it is an opportunity for personal growth. With all humility, I want to say, I hope my wife agrees to it, I'm a better person for having cancer 10 years back. Otherwise, I would not be as humble and as less arrogant than as I was 10 years back. Thank you very much. It's been wonderful to you.
We haven't finished yet. I think we're going to open, if we may, open this up to the floor. But I can't resist adding to the important things he said about how to relate to someone who's sick. And I think some of the one of the other things is, let me know if you need something. I mean, that's another one. I mean, this I just speak from personal experience. You're looking good. I'm feeling miserable. So, we often say the things we feel we ought to say. And if we don't know what to say nothing. Just the presence. Your presence can be a source of great comfort. We'll just open the floor. I mean, we can stay for as long as you like, but at least 15, 20 minutes. If you have any questions. Yes. Oh, hello.
Hello. Actually, you'll be quite surprised because we've been meeting at the IIC very often.
Yes.
But I'm a cancer survivor, and a beautiful one at that. Why?
That I endorse.
Because I'll tell you, the doctors at the Medanta hospital say, we've not seen a patient like you at all. You don't look like you've been to us for a surgery in 2011. I said, Doctor, bless you. You said the right thing, because I feel very happy when you say that. I'll tell you, I want to tell people here that, when you're going through cancer, when I was going through my chemotherapy, I never thought about, my goodness, what's happening to me? I never thought about it. They had this big television in front of me, and I was seeing that Calcutta hospital burning, and I said, oh my God, nurse, what's happening to those patients over there? How are they going to retrieve them? How are they going to help them? And she said, Madam, don't worry, you're on chemo. Just keep quiet. So you're very right. You must not concentrate on yourself. You must concentrate on others. And that's something I think I'm born with, because I'm always worrying about what's the problem happening somewhere or the other, and I'm not concentrating on myself as a cancer patient. I never have. I went to George Verghese, I think you know that. I met him at a Bangladesh High Commission party 2012 when I was on chemo. He said, hello, how are you? I said, I'm coming from a chemo in the morning and now I'm here at the party. He said, no, you coming from chemo? He was so surprised. I said, I've had a wash and a bath and I'm here for the party. I could never think I was having cancer. My son will endorse that, my goodness, you went through it as if to say you were taking an aspirin or an aspirin. He said, and when I saw those screens, there were 4 people being interviewed in 2015 on the television. They were cancer patients' parents, and the parents were crying and they were sobbing. And one of the patients was interviewed on the television, and he was full of. My son said, I never saw your tear in your eyes at all. He never saw me moping or wondering about how bad cancer is. So I've been through, I've been through, I won't say hell, I've been through heaven, because I'm keeping much better health now than I did before.
Thank you. Having said that, and I celebrate you, but I should also add that if that's not the way you feel, you're not a failure. Because sometimes we can set ourselves aspirations and benchmarks that remarkable, beautiful women are able to achieve, that which if we don't achieve, then we have an enormous sense of defeat. It's okay not to be okay, or not to meet those benchmarks. So we should be inspired by this as a possibility, but not defeated if we don't get there. Next question.
Everyone. So I think what the beautiful lady probably practiced, or she became like that, she disassociated with the disease. It's like mind over matter. And so positivity, it's easier said than done. Sometimes the physical disease is so much that you can't. But more and more you practice, which comes in meditation. You just meditate on a beautiful, healthy being. You just forget that you were sick. So when you do it time and over again, you have to dedicate yourself to that practice. The 16th Karmapa had cancer. And the doctors wanted to dissect him and find out where is the cancer, because his state of life was so high because of his practices, his state of mind, the meditation practice. He was all the time joking with the nurses and laughing. He had pain, but he didn't recognize pain. So I think the beautiful lady, she probably had that state of mind, the state of life, which defeated the cancer. We are bigger than the cancer. We have to just remember that.
Okay, so basically, it's very overwhelming for me because I have a history of a lot of people with cancer in my family. So I've always lived with this fear, will I get it or not get it? So regular checkups from 45. And somewhere it got missed in my mammogram, say 7 years back. So my cancer journey was that when I felt that I would have it, I didn't have it. And when I felt that everything is fine, I just got it. Never been in hospital, never fallen sick, full attendance. But so I don't want to delve there, but I just want to say that I exposed my vulnerability. I exposed my emotions. I cried. I also happened to be a counselor, with Sanjeevani many years. But my cancer journey has changed me. And I go back today, I volunteer with chemo, I volunteer with families, and people said, "Aap cancer mein kyun ghuse ho?" And just as you said, for me, my healing, my fear of recurrence was so high first 2 years. I had excellent doctors, but my fear of recurrence was so high. I took therapy, but what helped me was going back to the people who were going through it. First the patients and now families. So my healing has come from there. And I was told that because I'm a counselor for the last 20 years, I've taken everybody's angst. That's the reason why I have cancer. So, initially I would get angry, but later on, 6 years down the line, I realized people don't know. People don't know. People just say things they don't know. So as you say today, when we go back to the people who go through it, and not to break the chain, somewhere it's not, and one-on-one really helps. If you sit in a group and say, let's discuss, it doesn't work. It's always that one-on-one physical contact, face-to-face. And also, there has to be a closure. As you say, aapne chhod diya. You met a person for 3 times, then you feel he's doing well, move on. That doesn't work. You have to make that connect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The same way that Rajiv talked about his mother, I think talking is the most important thing. And more than that, equally documenting our Indian experiences. I totally agree with you. Our experience is very different than the Western one. We need to document it. We need to show the strengths in the family, in the individual, in the community to take care of cancer. This could be our then to the rest of the world. And when you go through the blog post, there is a blog post here, and write to me, send your story, we'll publish it for you.
What we'll do, if we may, is, for 10 minutes, we'll just sort of, anybody who wants to make a comment, ask a question, and then when that is over, we'll just make some closing remarks, because I think it's really important that we listen to each other. And so please, just keep it brief so as many people as possible can comment. Go ahead.
Sir, this is to Dr. Murthy. I just want to know how easy it was for you to let go of your previous self. Did you experience any grief?
Can take as a proactive measure. Being sensible persons, what are the proactive steps one can take?
I want to urge that, if we could focus on not so much on the clinical medical aspects of cancer, because I think the expertise or interest around the table is really about the mind, about healing, and about palliative care and when it becomes necessary. So, it's not, we don't want to dismiss the value of food or preventive medicine, but let's just stay with the... Yes, ma'am.
Yes, there's a lot of, I think we were mostly talking about the emotional support, but I think a large nursing part is also the financial support that the treatment needs, and I think that adds a lot to the emotional trauma.
So I was a caregiver, and I recently, last year, lost my husband, who was a psychiatrist to cancer, his student. And what I wanted to share basically was that, everything was good. We had a fantastic lifestyle. We were meditators for almost 30 years, eating sattvic food, following all the disciplined aspects of a good living. And still, when this thing comes and kind of hits you, say, what went wrong? What did I do wrong to be able to become or carry this or get this diagnosis and burden of going through it? So the first episode, in 3 chemo cycles, he went into remission. He was fine. And then it relapsed after 2 years. And this time it was in the brain. It was lymphoma. So it was in the brain. And what we found was that here was a person who was so talented, who was the most compassionate person I knew, not because he was my husband, and a fantastic psychiatrist, losing his mind and slowly deteriorating and losing all his functions. And I, as a clinical psychologist, with all my skills, all I could give him was love and a feeling of being there and caring, physically caring. I left my work, everything, because he was having gait disturbance, everything. His corpus callosum is completely gone. So it required every aspect of caring. And once when I asked him, when he was still okay cognitively, that what are you feeling? Why are you keeping quiet? He just smiled so beautifully. And he said, I feel a lot of love and uniqueness. And that's it. I don't know what more you can say to a person who's already experienced that state of mind. And what I believe and what my daughter and I believe is that he surrendered to the illness. And he let it take over and was willing to go away quite happily. He didn't know when he died. He didn't know because he had completely lost his cognitives. And he was semi-comatose. But the moment of death was nothing that he didn't perceive that. And he went very quietly, peacefully away. Just like we hear, the soul just left and body. So I just feel that in spite of So many things we talk about as preventative lifestyle and this and that, the food and medicines and treatment. The oncologist told me, it's not all this, it's the biology of the disease. You can't fight that. So I don't know. It seems like a defeatist kind of a thing, attitude, but I think the way he took it and the way we took it was that it's for some higher purpose. And that's how we got our healing. And I just wanted to share.
Thank you. That's very moving and very insightful. Thank you.
Hi. I was a caregiver for someone who had cancer, and also some stigma around mental illness and treatment of mental illness. And when they got cancer, the diagnosis, and their life changed, it was very clear for us who were caring for that person that there was mental distress, that they needed support. But because of the stigma that they harbored for themselves, there was a barrier to getting treatment for mental illness. So I'm curious, especially from the psychiatrists on the panel, when you think about stigma and you think about resistance to care and the impact that mental distress has on you, on top of struggling with cancer, what do you suggest at a public mental health level for caregivers? What can you do in that situation?
Thank you. Look, we are in no tearing hurry to wind this up because we are here for you. But, the clock ticks. So maybe we will just do 2 or 3 more questions, and I'll ask our subject specialists to comment on them.
Rajiv, I just wanted to add something. I took 15 chemos and 35 radiation. Very well. I never suffered. So I want people not to be afraid of chemo. Because a lot of people say, oh my God, doctor, I don't want chemo because I'm going to get sore there. I won't be hungry. But I was better hungry after chemo than I was. Chicken after chemo. I said, I'm feeling very hungry. And that's the best cook they had at Vedanta. That was the best recipe.
Is
Thank you very much.
Is there any final thing? Otherwise, okay, it's over to you, sir.
Yeah. Just for those of you who have asked for information about food, late age, preventive, just send me an email. On the back side, you have my email underlined. Just send it to me. I will respond personally, with any information you want. Secondly, my request to you all is that we need to develop an Indian narrative so that the Foundation for Universal Responsibility will take the responsibility of changing the cancer story in India. I mean it. If we have 100 stories like the elderly lady, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. We have it. Similarly, we have other side of the story. Then we'll have a spectrum of experiences to live rather than one only. The question of letting go, I come back to it very, very sincerely, brought me to the question of spirituality. I was not a spiritual person, I was a religious person, but spiritual. But one of my mentors, Dr. Reddy and Dr. Vig, helped me through this process to see it as a transition, not a loss. I'm borrowing it from Sri Ranganath Ranji, where he uses this concept of age. Same thing. Don't look at it as a loss. It is, we are going to lose. So, but I thought of it as transition. Then I said, can I use my technology, my skills to make a difference to cancer? And I, with all humbleness, I have made a difference to people in Bangalore and other things. And through this, we are trying to reach out to many people. And it is visited again and again by a large number of people even now. So my own, in case you think, are you talking theoretically? Like Sujata talked about it, another student of mine, Dr. Rajiv Gupta from Ludhiana, had cancer. He openly talked about it. He declared that I will not be living next birthday. And I worked with him and I have written up his experience. If you send me an email, I'll write to you. Lessons of living when life is uncertain. And he taught me, literally taught me, how to handle the end stage. And we built it around 7 questions. and I can share it with anyone who is interested. So there is a way, without being victorious or a defeatist, to find a middle path. The truth of Buddhism is always the middle path, and go forward to rediscover oneself and to redefine life for yourself. And that is the way I see it, and it has helped me. I don't know whether everyone should do it, everyone can do it, or it's possible to do it, I don't know. But I personally feel everyone should have an opportunity to rediscover their life through cancer if it happens to you. Thank you very much, and look forward to be of help to you. Thank you.
I'm not going to let you go till I request Dr. Murthy. And it's a very crucial question. And, you know, as you asked, what did I do wrong? That happens not merely when you have cancer, but in life. And of course, this connects to the larger spiritual idea that am I being punished for something? Did I do something wrong with it? Is karma, what have you? And the why me kind of idea. And this is also people like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who very famously have written about the stages of grief and dying. So I think it would be valuable for us, from all your vast experience, as to, if we were to just get a 101, a kind of, what are the classic, everybody's unique, but what are the classic stages, and I know that you have written about it, what are the classic stages, particularly for the person who receives this diagnosis, that they go through, and people who are with them, can they expect that it is inevitable that you will go through this thing of why me, resentment, anger. So what are these stages? Because then that helps the person, because he sort of says, well, this is not unusual to happen to me. And I think that's what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's amazing work has done. It has familiarized us with the process of coming to terms with immortality.
I would say very quickly, most people start with denial. Let's get a second opinion, let's go somewhere, let's deny a little bit. That is the first reaction. In my case, I said, because I was a doctor, I knew what it means. Within 24 hours, I got admitted and got operated within 3 days. I didn't even go to another doctor or something. Second one is severe depression. Not in a clinical sense, but a sense of hopelessness, worthlessness, uncertainty, fear for self and others. Then comes the struggle. Struggle of treatment, struggle of accepting the impermanence, as you have said it rightly, Rajiv, and slowly acceptance. And the final thing is, if you ask people, they will remember the day their diagnosis was made. They call it as a second birthday. Why? Because you suddenly realize the old self has died. Old self, which was going like a river, has been stopped by a dam, and you have to find a new product, new direction. And that does occur in various ways. Even in the illiterate people, I have seen it. Dr. Saab, isse mai Bhagwan ke bare mein sochne laga. I started thinking about God, and I made peace with myself, and that is a very big gain of, if you can use it as a gain of cancer. And whether it occurs sequentially, no. Some people might jump to the thing, some people go back to it. I'll tell you one incident which happened to me. I was so afraid of cancer recurrence. I kept my chemo port for 5 years, which meant every 2 months I had to go and get it flushed. Every 2 months I had to go to the hospital, But I was so happy with my chemo port, I said I will hold on to it. And the 5th PET scan, when I had, suddenly the doctor said, you have to wait till the afternoon to do one more. Those 6-8 hours was the worst in my life. My life, I'll remember, we thought, my God, there is a recurrence, what is going to happen? All sorts of things. So this is, it's a one of emotional turmoil, or like it happened when the Samudra Manthan occurred. Poison came, but ultimately Amrut came, end. So whether you live or not, I think it's possible to rediscover yourself, spiritually grow, and be a better person. That's my, how long you live is not the thing, but you can be a better person with cancer. That's my personal lesson.
I still can't bring closure with one very important question that was raised. And I'm just wondering what your perspective and experience is on the issue of when and if. I mean, you make the choice or to stop treatment and say, okay, now I surrender to what is going to happen. Sorry. This is extremely important in the case when you're under the care of Western medicine, who, once you're in that hospital, you do not have that choice unless you have a benign doctor who says, go home, there's nothing I can do.
So I think there are a number of people I know who have taken the decision, including one of my teacher in Vellore, whom I met him, and then it happened, then he said, no, I don't want anything more. Allow me to go peacefully. You know, so it's a very extremely personal. But what I would like to do is that leave it to the individual to make the choice, rather than the family making the choice or the medical person making the choice. Ultimately, life is uncertain. We are not going to live forever. And the person should have, this is my personal position, Rajiv. I'm not saying that forcefully tell the person, but forcefully don't, because the person might like to go to Tirupati, or might like to go to some place, or do something, give away something. You know, like for example, last week, one of my classmate came all the way from England, bringing 2 suitcases full of clothes. She wanted to give it to charity. He said, Murthy, I have come here, because I don't want to throw it away in England and waste it. Someone will use it here. So you don't know what type of a wish people have it, and you must not rob them of that. This is my personal position, Rajiv.
No, it's a very valuable one, but I think the issue really is that often we are not in that position to make that choice, and we have to make it on behalf of someone else, and that's really difficult and wrenching. And where do we begin? How do we engage with that?
Again, I don't have an answer, but you're please.
Allopathy is not the end of the game. There is so much available in the holistic health that one can try all that, like father or whoever was 80, 85, but then, there is so much options in the holistic.
You know, the difficulty, you're absolutely right, but the difficulty is how, for example, if I'm told that, look, I'm got stage 4, there are people who have got better. There's no doubt about it.
Sir, I have a patient who was in my clinic today, stage 4 bone marrow cancer. 6 months, he's cancer free. He's on Gerson's therapy, protocol, but he dedicated himself.
But I told you 3 of my dear friends in the best of the medical situations are no more within 2 years of cancer, not because of the best of the things. So it's a very complicated thing. Don't get into the dynamic of this is right, that is right.
But I'm only saying that chemotherapy is not the end of the world.
Absolutely, I agree with you on that. I'm not saying, but don't rob the person of the opportunity to make peace with himself or herself. Ultimately, we all have to make peace with us. So the reason why, when Sudhir said, will you talk about it, I said, not because I wanted the audience, but I said the spiritual thing which Rajiv represents and has been advocating is the reason I said I must come and talk about it. The ultimate Ramband is finding yourself through some way, through either your Quran or Gita or Bible or whatever it is, or your own spiritual things. That's my thing.
Okay, now I will take the privilege of a few sort of remarks, and then it's over to answer your question. I just go back to my notion of niyat. So with what motivation do you take that call? That's what you have to examine. And sometimes in families it's very difficult, that motivation, because there are contrarian motivations. Some people just don't want to take responsibility. Some people, maybe there are all kinds of issues that come in, and it also depends on a personal philosophy. There's I don't know how many know, there's a Dr. Hariharan, a very famous cardiac surgeon at Apollo Hospital, who's also a friend of mine, and I asked him this question. And I said, we have this sort of familiar idea that you put someone on a ventilator and that's it, and the hospital is milking a lot of money, which in general I believe to be true. But he said, I don't know which hospital I'll end up when I need one, but he said something very interesting. He said, you know, it's all a question, unfortunately, in all medicine, of probability. So someone goes onto a ventilator and comes out 6 months later, hey, Lati, and nothing, and someone is, you know, gone in 48 hours. So we just finally have to go back into our motivation in the call we take, or the call the doctor takes, or the hospital they takes. If it's taken to keep the bed active and make money, then it's obviously wrong. And someone has to take that call. And to duck it, I think, is to be as guilty as to have the wrong, wrong motivation. So thank you very much for this very rewarding and illuminating evening. Certainly for me, I have learned so much from you, sir.
Thank you.
And in Inki Chhatra Chhaya mein,